Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Rich. Today we're going to mix things up just a little bit. That's right, we're going to take my Santa Cruz Hightower V2 and we're going to convert it into a mullet with a little help from some friends of the channel.
That checks all the boxes.
It's probably safe to say that most of you are familiar with this infamous hairstyle from the 80s, but if you're not already familiar with what a mullet setup is on a bike, well, that is a varying wheel size combination in which the goal is to mix and match the advantages of two different wheel diameters in an attempt to mitigate the compromises between the disadvantages of each individual size. Don't worry, it's not as complicated as it sounds, and I'll do my best to make quick sense of it during the course of this video. The application of this term can be a little confusing. While the hairstyle has a shorter length up front and notably longer length out back, the opposite is true for the world of mountain bikes. To make sense of it, you've got to consider this legendary hairstyle's motto: business up front, party in the back. The 29-inch wheel with its larger rollover and contact patch makes quick work of gnarly rock gardens, providing a little extra grip and stability along the way. While the 27-inch wheel is a bit easier to maneuver, it just begs to be flicked around and provides a little bit more ease in tight cornering. In the last couple of years, the industry as a whole has started to turn towards this mixed wheel setup as the latest and greatest trend. As with all trends, the question begs to be asked: is the hype all it's cracked up to be, or will this be another passing fad? I wanted to find out for myself, so I linked up with my friends at SpokeX and Cascade Components and picked up a few goodies to test out. If you're not already familiar with Cascade Components, they make incredible aftermarket suspension links to help improve the suspension performance of a number of the most popular bikes on the market today. I've been riding their Hightower LT link for over a year now, and they were kind enough to loan me their Hightower Mullet link to test out. I also needed a 27.5 wheel for the rear, and my friends at SpokeX set me up with a loaner wheel set with their new prototype house brand carbon rims. Their only request: bash on these rims as hard as possible to see how they hold up. For 2 weeks, I've been putting this bike up against some of the gnarliest terrain here in the southeastern US. Much to my surprise, I discovered one truly unexpected outcome, but we'll get to that here in just a bit. To kick things off, we'll be at the proving grounds of Snowshoe Bike Park. From 3-mile-long flow trails to steep and gnarly tech trails, this venue has it all. I think after a handful of days of riding here, I'll have a great feel for what these mullet shenanigans are all about. So let's get to it. I opted to warm up on some nice intermediate flow trails. I know these trails very well, and immediately I could notice a difference. I was wondering how much adjustment time it would take, but I felt very comfortable on the bike right away. I could almost immediately feel a noticeable improvement in agility. The bike just felt more willing to tilt and carve in the turns. There was maybe a hint of increased chatter coming from the rear, but not enough to really stand out as a negative here. There was no question that things were different. I'd even go as far as to say that it felt like almost an entirely different bike. The more I warmed up and got into the groove, the more the bike started to come alive. The feel was sporty and very well suited to this terrain. I did not notice much detriment in its ability to carry speed in the rolling sections, but I did feel like there was a perceivable increase in acceleration coming out of corners. The next trail was pretty similar, but with more corners, some tight sections in the trees, and more opportunity to get the bike up into the air. Most of what I was experiencing on the previous trail remained the same. However, there are some key sections where this trail flattens a bit, and my ability to hold momentum became just a bit more challenging. It wasn't terrible by any means, and honestly, it was the first time I felt any drawbacks in this setup. This is a super fast blue tech trail that's a favorite of mine. It has a few tight moves, but also plenty of open speed with chunky roots and rocks.
Oh yeah.
I kind of suspected I'd feel the rear end hang up a bit on this one, but honestly, it was marginal. There's enough pumping and floating going on that the liveliness of the bike kept things moving with no major noticeable detriment in my ability to hold momentum. About halfway down, the trail swaps names and character to a flatter and more intense section of roots and rocks. The chunk is constant and the speed is much slower. Admittedly, I did notice the rear end hanging up just a touch here. Again, pumping through here helped to mitigate that feeling, but there's still a few spots that it seemed unavoidable. This was the first trail that I started to really consider whether the advantages were being balanced out by the drawbacks of this setup.
so playful.
This blue Flowtech trail brings in some more opportunity for airtime with more high speed and some tighter corners. It's no surprise the bike felt great in the air and the cornering was met with a bit more ease. This trail has tons of flow, so the drawbacks of the smaller wheel didn't present themselves until we got down into a section called the Ball and Jack chute. This is a long, high-speed section filled with non-stop chatter. The rear end really started to fold its cards here, feeling much more loose, chattery, and slower in this section. We split off onto a black Flowtech trail that offered some jumps, drops, and a bit more high-speed route chatter. As you can guess, the overall experience remained consistent, just a bit more amplified. It's time to crank things up a bit and take this test to Snowshoe's most infamous natural gnarly terrain over in the basin. Up to this point, the pros have been outweighing most of the cons, but this is where all of that took a bit of a 180.
Definitely feel it getting hung in all of this.
Having just previously ran these sections on a full 29 setup, the difference was more than just slightly noticeable. The smaller wheel out back really met its match with the constant chunky nature of these trails. Granted, terrain like this is not the norm for many people, so this might not at all play into your own equation when choosing what format works best for you. But for me, I love this stuff, and the drawback here is significant. There was no question that I'd prefer my full 29 setup here, which allowed me to hold much more momentum to maintain better stability. It didn't take much to feel at home on this setup, and after many days of getting acquainted, I began to wonder how transitioning back to a full 29 was going to feel. I wondered if I'd struggle a touch when I first hopped back onto my normal setup, and the real test would be getting onto my downhill bike, which not only sports big wheels front and rear, but is incredibly long and slack in comparison. What I didn't expect to find though was that not only did I feel right at home back on the big bike, but I was actually riding it better than before. I had a crash which required surgery and time off the bike back in March, and honestly, I've never felt quite fully back up to speed ever since. It seemed as though the Mullet setup gave me the confidence I needed to break through my hesitation with more aggressive cornering. For the first time in months, I felt that spark I had before the crash, and it was an amazing feeling. I really had no idea going into this experiment that this would be the outcome. Before closing this out, we've also got to take a look at the climbing characteristics of this setup, which presented drawbacks for me as well. While it was a touch easier to accelerate for quick punches than my larger wheels, overall, it proved to hang up a touch more over roots and rocks, much the same as in the slower speed technical sections on the downhills. The lacking rollover capability in comparison to its larger counterpart is manageable at higher speeds, but as soon as things slow down, it sticks out like a sore thumb. So, is a Mullet bike in my future? Well, not for now. The performance in the more gnarly tech and climbs was enough to keep me from making the leap away from my everyday 29-inch wheels. At 6 feet tall with a 30-inch inseam, I have the luxury of ample tire clearance 99% of the time. If I had less clearance, I'd be inclined to focus more on the overall benefits, but that's just not the case for me. What is attractive to me is the idea of having one bike that has the ability to convert between the two. I know what you're thinking. With the link I borrowed from Cascade, I have that ability. Honestly, it's an awesome solution. If I were planning to keep the Hightower, there's no question I would go this route. But I've been riding this bike for a couple of years since its release, and as incredible as it is, I'm going to be putting it up for sale pretty soon. Believe me, this experience has given me mixed feelings on that decision, but I've got other big plans for the future. That wraps up today's episode. If you enjoyed this one, please click that like button. It helps us keep content like this coming your way. Do you ride a mullet setup? Drop us a comment down below and tell us about your experiences. If you want to know more about the rims and the link that we use in this video, keep an eye on the channel. We're going to drop a couple of follow-up videos with more info on those. Thanks for coming along for the ride today, and until next time, hope to see you out on the trails.